the function of art in physical, mental, and spiritual care. I think something that's very timely. So welcome, Maggie, and I will mute my.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me this afternoon. I hope this finds you all well. I'm very excited to share some of my current research at the museum with all of you, and hope to see you all sometime in the near or distant future in person at the museum. So I'm going to share my screen. Oh, here we go, I'll do this. Yes, share and okay. All right, and I will dive in. Everyone can see me, hear me, we're good to go? All right. So, as part of the human condition, we all confront illness or disability at some point in our life. There are diverse ways, culturally and historically, that people have dealt with the treatment and prevention of health challenges. But today I will focus particularly on the healing function of art. In 3 of the 4 cases that I will discuss, the works of art reveal the close connection between spiritual and bodily well-being. This is a somewhat recognizable idea today, that a healthy body begets a healthy mind and vice versa. The works of art I will present: an etching by Rembrandt, a polychrome or painted sculpture of Saint Sebastian, and 2 copper sculptures of the Bashaya Guru, or the Buddha of medicine, all address and even facilitate healing in a direct way within their respective spiritual and cultural contexts. These works had, or perhaps have, a use value, offering channels through which one can seek healing help and offer insight into the daily function of art beyond aesthetic value. I'll conclude my presentation with the depiction of an earthly caregiver, Dr. Paul Gachet, who befriended and cared for Vincent van Gogh in the last months of his life. The artist found solace in his friendship with Dr. Gachet, who was also a lover of art, and Van Gogh painted and etched several portraits of his doctor during their time together. It's my hope that I can briefly
Did we lose her? Oh no. Can anyone hear me? Is it? Oh, okay. Okay. Maggie? Okay, give me a second here, folks.
Aaron, it's Barbara. I can hear you, but I can't hear her.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for confirming that. I thought it was me. Okay, it looks like we may have lost her. She dropped out here. Hopefully we will, she'll come back in. Did everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, folks.
I think she had the internet connection problem.
Yeah, it could be. My apologies, folks. Stephanie, would you mind giving her a ring just to ensure that she can come back on and finish her presentation? Okay, let's talk amongst ourselves. What else do we have coming up? Anyone have an announcement?
Yeah, Aaron?
Yes.
John Jones here.
Okay, great.
Can you go ahead and give a little bit more about the DDF while we're
Perfect.
If you got a gap, right?
Yes, sir.
We were able to fund the $10,790 was submitted and approved just recently. We were able to contribute about $3,200 to the bike project. They're going to build 200 bikes. Is Maggie back?
She is.
Okay, I'll stop.
Thanks so much. We're going to hear more about that next week, right?
No problem.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, Maggie.
I'm so sorry. I should confess that I'm actually not in Pasadena. I'm on Palomar Mountain right now, and our internet is touch and go, to be honest. So
okay.
I appreciate your patience.
If you get cut off again, you can call in. You can call in if you like.
Oh, great. Okay. That's good to know. So what was the last thing that you all heard?
If you can bring up your slideshow one more time. we can
Dr.
kind of-
Gachet. Dr. Gachet and
Gachet, okay.
Okay,
yeah, all right.
thank you, Jacob.
Thank you. Yes, perfect. All right, how's that? Are we all together?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right, Dr. Gachet. Okay, so yes, talk about Saint Sebastian. Okay. So one of the key objects from my upcoming exhibition is a polychrome or painted sculpture of Saint Sebastian, likely from central Italy. I'm particularly excited to include it in my forthcoming exhibition because since it's come to the Simon, it has never been on view. Standing just under 5 feet tall, the figure of the saint is almost nude except for a simple undergarment. His elbows jut out from behind his back where his hands are bound to a sculpted tree trunk. Though, despite this predicament, Sebastian's face is serene. The saint's body is punctured with holes that are now plugged, though they are still surrounded by remnants of dripping red paint, indicating that the now sealed openings were meant to indicate wounds. At one time, arrow shafts protruded from these injuries, though they have since been lost or removed. According to legend, Sebastian was a Roman soldier who was shot with arrows as punishment for his Christian faith. He survived this onslaught only to be stoned to death and tossed unceremoniously in the Roman sewers. Sebastian is usually depicted tied to a tree, his body bristling with arrows, as in this 1464 fresco by Benozzo Gozzoli in the main church of San Gimignano in Italy. Like the Simon's Sebastian, Gozzoli's saint is shown here with his arms tied behind him, stoically gazing upward toward Christ and the Virgin Mary. In the 15th century, Sebastian's pious endurance and miraculous recovery was associated with salvation from the bubonic plague. His bleeding wounds are visually similar to the sores caused by the pestilence, and in some cases, the offending arrows were used to symbolize vectors of disease. For instance, Gozzoli painted another fresco in San Gimignano depicting Saint Sebastian shielding the city from the plague's scourge, represented as arrows hurled by a wrathful god. Sebastian was widely popular in Europe as a protector of those suffering from the plague, which recurred in devastating outbreaks from the 14th to the 17th centuries, leading to the productions of numerous images and sculptures of this saint. Our Sebastian has been reasonably identified as a 15th century Northern Italian sculpture, but beyond this, little is known. Like many polychrome sculptures, it likely entered the international art market a few centuries ago, and the histories of such objects can be difficult to trace. While the written record is scarce, much knowledge can be gained from the physical sculpture itself. This February, in collaboration with the Norton Simon conservator John Griswold, depicted here, looking very scientific, and the Decorative Art and Sculpture Conservation Department at the Getty Museum, we used X-radiography and XRF technology to examine the structural and material nature of the sculpture. We were excited to learn that some of the more nuanced elements of Sebastian's musculature were molded from gesso over a wood armature, and the saint's torso is adhered to the vertical support with a massive nail, reminiscent of the arrows that once pierced the figure's exterior. In further analyzing the sculpture's physical history, we hope to better understand its original context and how and where it was produced, and how it may have been used by viewers at the time. In the Buddhist tradition, sculptures could also have immediate healing effects, especially those of the Bhashaya Guru, the Sanskrit name for the Buddha of medicine. Devotion to Bhashaya Guru was and is widespread, particularly in Tibet, Japan, and China. The Norton Simon has 2 copper statues of the medicine Buddha, one from 16th century Tibet, and the other from 11th century India or Myanmar, India or Myanmar, also known as Burma. In some belief systems, the Bhashaya Guru Buddha is thought to be a manifestation of the historical Buddha, who before achieving enlightenment was known as Siddhartha. Siddhartha is sometimes also referred to as the supreme physician because he stressed the value of proper healthcare. The Buddha of medicine is seen as an embodiment of the practice of caring for the sick and suffering, an important tenet of Buddhism. Though there are significant differences between the two sculptures, shared aspects of their appearance identify them as Buddhas, such as their extended earlobes and top knot. Both figures also wear humble monk's robes, though the robes of the 16th century Buddha fall in graceful folds, whereas those of the 11th century adhere closely to the figure's body. These latter robes are particularly interesting because they seem to be made of patchwork with different pieces of fabric set apart by the patina of the copper and outlined by holes punched into the metal. This likely refers to the traditional practice among Buddhist monks who would sew their robes from donated pieces of fabric as a practice of humility and renunciation, as in this beautiful example from the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. In addition to the broader identification of the Buddha as Buddhas, the figure's particular poses, known as mudras, help identify them specifically as Vajrayana Guru, or the Buddha of medicine. Both sit in the Vajrasana pose with the right foot crossed over the left. The left hand rests in an open position on the figure's laps, while the palm of the right hand faces outward away from the figure, thumb and forefinger pressed together in a gesture of offering healing medicine. This pose also appears in a late 14th to mid 15th century Tibetan painted scroll depicting the Vajrayana Guru that is held at the Harvard Art Museums. Here, the figure displays the same gestures as the Simon sculptures, though he is holding objects sometimes associated with the Buddha of medicine, including a bowl cradled in his left hand, and the myrobalan fruit, which is used for its healing properties, offered in his right hand. Similarly to the Simon's 11th century Vajrayana Guru, this is similar to the Simon's 11th century Vajrayana Guru, which extends medicinal fruit towards the viewer in his right hand. The painted Tibetan Buddha of medicine is also flanked by two bodhisattvas, or humans on the path to enlightenment, who represent the sun and the moon. These two figures regularly appear in painted representations of the Buddha of medicine, and suggest that possibly the Simon's Buddhas may have also been attended by sculpted bodhisattvas at one point, although their small sizes, about 4 inches and 13 inches respectively, may indicate that they were used as personal votive figures. The sutra or scriptures of the Vajrayana Guru states that upon attaining enlightenment, he made 12 vows centered on caring for the bodies and spirits of those who honored him. One such vow declares, "I vow to relieve all pain and poverty from the very sick and poor. Let the sick be cured, the helpless be helped, and the poor be assisted." Images of the Buddha of medicine not only guided meditation on the importance of caregiving, but could also themselves facilitate healing. Depending on the affliction, merely touching representations of the Buddha of medicine could produce a cure, though in more serious cases, complex rituals described in the sutra are required. As in some Christian contexts, the boundaries between the image as a representation and the image as a true source of sacred power can be flexible in Buddhism. While this created anxiety within certain Christian sects, generally speaking, in Buddhist practice, images have historically been accepted as important guides towards spiritual enlightenment. In the 17th century Dutch Republic, where Protestantism had flourished, there was more skepticism towards religious images which were feared to lead to idolatry. Nevertheless, there remained a significant market for images of religious scenes that were deemed useful for meditating on Christian teachings. Many of these images circulated as prints, which were reproducible and more affordable than painting. Rembrandt van Rijn, who was especially successful as a creator of religious images, developing new techniques that allowed for sensitive depictions of human expression and emotion. This etching of Peter and John performing a miraculous act of healing was the last biblical scene Rembrandt produced, and one of the last prints that he made in his life. It depicts a story from the 3rd chapter of the Acts of the Apostles, in which 2 of Christ's apostles, Peter and John, encounter a man who is unable to walk, and who sat every day at the entrance to the temple in Jerusalem seeking alms. Upon meeting the man, Peter invokes the name of Christ and compels him to walk, which he does to the astonishment of the bystanders, depicted here huddled against the column to the left. Characteristically, Rembrandt carefully depicts the gestures and expressions of the figures. The disabled man extends his bowl, his face upturned in supplication. He appears small next to the impressive figure of Peter, who gestures widely, and even smaller in comparison to the monumental architecture of the temple in the background. Rembrandt used drawing to practice depicting gestures that recurred again and again in his work. For instance, in the black chalk drawing produced many years before this print, the man's open arms draped in heavy robes echo those of Peter. However, Rembrandt adjusted the pose for the purpose of this biblical narrative. Peter's posture is more erect, perhaps more commanding, as he summons divine power to cure the seated man before him. Beyond offering a depiction of the healing power of faith, this print also gives modern viewers a glimpse into the relationship between poverty, health, and the urban environment in 17th century Europe. Though the biblical scene is set in ancient Jerusalem, Rembrandt follows conventions of his day for representing people who were poor and sick. In the 17th century, infirmity, either from disease or disability, and financial hardship were understood to be closely linked. In Albrecht Dürer's engraving of the same subject, made over 100 years before Rembrandt's, the physical disability of the seated alms seeker is more pronounced, emphasizing for viewers at the time the depth of his need and the potency of the miracle Peter was about to perform. Disability and illness could make working difficult, and if one was not already wealthy, could lead to seeking assistance in public spaces. Oh, sorry. In the visual arts of this period, people asking for alms are often depicted in threshold spaces like doorways, porches, and steps, as in the earlier print by Rembrandt depicting a family of beggars. And I have left that image out for you, unfortunately, but the family of beggars who are extending their hand through the doorway in seek of alms. This pictorial strategy of placing impoverished people in the marginal yet public spaces of a city is suggestive of the reality that many people faced, particularly if they were ill or disabled. Unlike their wealthier counterparts who could afford a physician's house calls, people with less means often needed to resort to public begging or to one of the large public hospitals designated for poor relief. Several centuries later, another Dutch artist, Vincent van Gogh, created a sensitive homage to his caregiver in the etched portrait of his doctor and friend, Paul Gachet. Dr. Gachet was a homeopathic physician who had been recommended to Van Gogh's family by the artist Camille Pissarro. Van Gogh went to live with the doctor in his home in Auvers-sur-Oise, just north of Paris, after a long stay at a psychiatric hospital in Saint-Rémy. Immediately, Van Gogh found a kindred spirit in Gachet, who was also a lover of art. Writing to his sister Wilhelmina in June of 1890, the same year he made this portrait, Vincent said, quote, "I have found a true friend in Dr. Gachet, something like another brother. So much do we resemble each other physically and also mentally." The artist knew his doctor only a short while, as he took his own life just 2 months after arriving in Auvers-sur-Oise. Nevertheless, Gachet made a significant impression on the artist, and he produced 3 portraits of the doctor during their acquaintance. It was Gachet who introduced Van Gogh to the art of etching, So the story goes, the doctor showed the artist the technique after dinner one evening. Van Gogh chose Gachet as the subject of his first and only etching, a printing of which is in the Norton Simons collection here, and which became the inspiration for 2 subsequent portraits. Van Gogh was fascinated by the process of painting portraits, which, based on his many letters, seemed almost like a therapeutic practice through which he could understand other people and himself. Writing to his brother Theo, the artist said that the portraits, quote, allowed him to cultivate what was best and deepest in him. He felt that portraits were a way to capture the character and psychology of the subject, but more than that, Van Gogh saw portrait painting as a means of exploring what he perceived to be the psychology of his era. Writing in a letter about his painted portraits, he says, quote, I painted a portrait of Dr. Gachet with an expression of melancholy, which would seem to look like a grimace to many who saw the canvas. And yet it is necessary to paint it like this, for otherwise one could not get the idea of the extent to which, in comparison with the calmness of old portraits, there is an expression in our modern heads and passion, like a waiting for things as well as growth. Sad and yet gentle, but clear and intelligent, this is how one ought to paint many portraits. So I hope this overview of images of caregivers in their many forms has provided a sense of the power of art, not only to record personal and historical understandings of what it means to care for others, but also that art itself can serve a caregiving and healing role. As my colleagues and I plan for the reopening of the museum at a still yet to be determined date, we see ourselves in a new role of caregivers, not only for the art objects in our collection, but especially for our public. We look forward to offering a safe and, we hope, restorative return to experiencing art in person. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. If you don't mind, we'd like to, I think we have some questions. Is it okay if I stop your
yeah.
slideshow? Okay.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Okay, of course, 1 second. Okay, please raise your hand if you have any questions for Margaret. Let me go to Denise.
Well, can you bring back up the Van Gogh for us, Erin?
I think Maggie, if you can try that one more time.
Can you bring up the pair of Van Goghs?
Yes.
This is the way that I would show my children at school using art. Once you have it up, I'll show you.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I need to do it through Zoom itself.
We talk about interpreting people's spaces, and we just talked today about Zoom fatigue and how part of Zoom fatigue is that we can't get the dopamine highs that we get from talking to people online because of this lag. But if you were to take your hands, folks, and cover up everything except the guy's eyebrows, and you look at how eyebrows carry so much meaning in our world. And that's one of the things, this is a great way for me to take a screenshot and compare this for my children so that they can see that you can see such a difference between how Van Gogh depicted the eyebrows on the left and how he depicted them on the right. And it's huge for us. So anyway, I just think that's so cool that you brought this up for us. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, I'm going to bring that down one more time so that I can see. Oh, sorry, Denise. Okay, any other questions? Barbara, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Maggie, very much for a very informative presentation. You've also motivated me to finish this book, which I'm trying to learn, Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. So maybe I can provide some help at some point. Maybe we ought to add to the board a healer to your to board. But thank you, Maggie, very much. I do recommend this book, by the way. I don't know if any of you have read it, but it's by Dan Harris, and it's a very humorous way to get into meditation, which I'm trying to do. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Any other questions? I have a question, Maggie. Can you tell us about what's happening at the museum now? How is the work being cared for? What's different now? What's different now than it has been in the past, I guess?
Well, most of the curatorial team is working from home. And so it's been difficult to do research. We don't have access to our library, things like that. We have our wonderful conservator, John Griswold, who I showed earlier, looking at the St. Sebastian. He's on campus every day. He's making sure that everything stays dusted and protected and bug-free and all of those things. We also have a wonderful security team who is going into work every single day. There are essential workers and they're keeping the place up and running. But we have no plans to reopen. This is when we talk about every week, basically, but things seem to change so quickly. So we are dedicating a lot of effort to online initiatives that will hopefully be up and running soon. But yeah, so far
Okay.
we're all just kind of working from home and holding our breath.
Okay, are the pieces like individually wrapped, or are they being covered in any way, or is it just like any other old day?
No, I mean, if anything, they're safer than they were when people were there, because there's no one breathing on them, no one, unable to resist the urge to touch, which I very much understand that urge, believe me. But yeah, they are safer than ever before, especially since we have a care team that's also there every week.
Okay. And then I do have another question. So assistant curator sounds like such an attractive position, right? You get to work at the museum, number one. Can you tell us about your path to become an assistant curator? What was your education like, and how did you, when did you start as a Norton Simon, et cetera?
I mean, I have to say I was extremely lucky, I think, all the way through. So I did my master's and PhD at UC Santa Barbara. I was able to spend 2.5 years in Italy on a fellowship where I was able to do my dissertation research and got, experience working in these archives with just absolutely ancient volumes and learning this handwriting that is basically impossible to read. And that was just an extraordinary experience. And so after I came back from Florence, I was hired as a graduate intern as I finished my PhD at the Norton Simon. And was able, I think, because the leadership there is very open to new ideas and new voices, I'm very grateful for this, saw me as a good member of their team. And so I was able to stay on in the role that I'm in now and pursue this exhibition project that I briefly mentioned. And then hopefully another project coming up in 2023 that will be on representations of poverty.
Okay.
But it was a pretty straightforward path. I have to say I was very fortunate.
Okay, thank you so much. And I have one more part to this question. I'll be quiet. What does an assistant curator do, and how does that differ from the curator? Can you tell us about what you do at the museum?
So I think because the staff at the Simon is so small, there are only 4 curators. And we're actually down 1 curator. We need to hire somebody for our South Asian collection, which is fabulous. And so if you know any South Asian curators who are looking for a job, we'll be hiring for that position at some point soon. But there's only 4 of us. And so I take on a lot of more responsibility than I think an assistant curator would at a larger museum. The primary job that I have is to come up with exhibitions and research projects on the collection. And so the St. Sebastian that I showed was a major research project that I undertook last year, and developing exhibitions, as well as giving talks and maybe making judgment calls about treatments of objects and care for objects.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions? Lois, if you can unmute yourself. Let's give her just a second. Sorry, Lois, we can't hear you. There we go.
I got it. Thank you. It only took me a long time. At any rate, the title of the book by the author, Dan Harris, can you tell me the name of that again?
I think that was Barbara, was that?
Yes, I think it was.
Oh.
Lois, I'll send it to you.
Okay. Do you want to say it?
It's called Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. by
Thank you.
Dan Harris.
Thank you. Meditate. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I've got it.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions for Margaret? Thank you so much, Margaret, for coming today and sharing this very special program. We will be donating a book on your behalf to our Kroll Public Library. So thank you so much.
That's very kind.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank
This
you
was a
for coming
pleasure.
today.
Thank you all.
Thank you for coming today. Please don't forget, next week for our program, we have Dr. Bethany Montugano from the Pacific Asia Museum. Rotarians and guests, thank you so much for joining us for today's meeting. The October 22nd, 2020 meeting of the Rotary Club of San Marino is adjourned. Thank you so much. Please make sure to invite somebody for next week. We would like some more guests. Invite your friends. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Devin.
Walk on Saturday.
Bye,
Go
Stephanie.
Dodgers.
Yeah, walk on Saturday. Go Dodgers.
Go Dodgers.
Come on.
Walk and Peace Conference, full day on Saturday.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you,
Thank
Fong.
you.
Thank you, Barbara.
Bye, Aaron.
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you, Lois.
Thank you.
Okay. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, okay? I'm gonna let's see, I'm gonna stop recording and then I'm gonna